Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're going to completely shatter what you think you know about ancient warfare. We're deconstructing the Roman legion, the ancient world's ultimate military machine, and diving into the raw, brilliant mechanics of how they actually fought. You've been lied to. Seriously, forget everything you've seen in the movies, because almost all of it is dead wrong. Those massive, chaotic, screaming, sword-clashing mosh pits you see on the big screen, yeah, that is absolutely not how ancient warfare worked. Okay, let's dive into this. Think about it. Real, life-or-death close-quarters combat is unbelievably taxing, physically and mentally. The human body literally cannot sustain a chaotic duel for hours on end. It's just impossible. Historical reality was so much slower than you imagine. It was highly structured, completely governed by exhaustion, and driven by dynamic standoffs and localized charges. Military historian Philip Sabin really hits the nail on the head here. If a soldier just blindly charged out of line to fight one-on-one, they'd instantly lose the protection of the guys next to them, opening themselves up to a strike from the side or behind. Breaking formation like that would be a suicidal move. Real Roman battles were highly organized, cohesive lines that held their shape at all costs. Section 1. The First Contact. A rain of javelins. So put yourself in the boots of a Roman legionary for the terrifying first 30 seconds of a fight. It wasn't a wild mob. It was a precise, devastating three-step sequence. First, at about 15 to 20 meters out, a massive volley of heavy javelins, the Pilum, rains down to destroy enemy shields. Second, they crash in with their own heavy shield, the Scutum, literally punching forward to unbalance the enemy. And third, before the enemy even knows what hit them, a quick, lethal thrust with the short sword, the Gladius. It was all about the push, not the slash. Now, what's really interesting about this arsenal is the pure, brutal efficiency of the gear. The Pilum weighed about 1.7 kilograms. That's roughly the weight of a house brick. Imagine hundreds of those flying at you. They were designed to bend on impact so the enemy couldn't throw them back, making their shields completely useless. Then you've got the Scutum, equipped with a heavy iron boss used for literal punching. And the Gladius? Unlike Celtic swords that were swung wildly and would often bend out of shape, the Roman Gladius was strictly for a quick, energy-efficient thrust. Section 2. The system. The genius of empty space. But the true genius of the Roman war machine wasn't just the individual weapons, it was the grinding system itself. And counterintuitively, that system relied heavily on empty space. We always picture these ancient shield walls as guys tightly packed, overlapping shields shoulder to shoulder. But the Romans kept a calculated 3-foot gap around every single soldier. That wasn't a mistake. It allowed for fluid movement, giving them room to maneuver their shields and actually use their swords. And crucially, that empty space allowed for their absolute biggest tactical advantage: line rotation. Physiologically, even elite fighters exhaust themselves in about 15 minutes of all-out combat. The Romans solved this biological limit by using multiple lines. When the front rank was gassed or wounded after their 15 minutes were up, they'd smoothly cycle back through those empty spaces, and fresh reserves would step right up. That is how fresh troops just kept coming. And this brilliantly illustrates how the rear lines acted as a massive psychological safety net. They stood back as a tactical deterrent, stopping the enemy from exploiting gaps, while simultaneously protecting their own reserves from the insane physical stress of the front line, right up until it was exactly their turn to fight. Through this system, they were quite literally fighting as one single body. A lone Roman soldier out on his own was incredibly vulnerable. But thousands of them, moving in perfect unison, keeping that 3-foot spacing, cycling fresh men forward, they generated an absolutely unstoppable, compounding force. Section 3. Psychology, Sound, and the Breaking Point. Let's slow down for a second here and just think about the immense psychological weight of this environment. The fear, the sheer sensory overload. Imagine 5,000 men marching toward you, but there's this eerie, terrifying silence, just the synchronized clattering of boots in armor. And then the breaking point, the sudden blast of commanding horns, the screaming war cries, and the brutal crash of shields and metal. But going back to that rule about exhaustion, the clash couldn't last forever. The true default state of these battles was a protracted standoff. They were pulsating events. You'd get a brief flurry of terrifying localized hand-to-hand combat, and then both sides would literally take a few steps back out of reach. They'd catch their breath, throw insults, maybe chuck some rocks, and just wait for the officers to order the next surge. So, the crucial point is, the massive death tolls we read about rarely happen during those face-to-face surges. The true slaughter happened when the psychological strain finally became too much. The moment a formation lost its nerve, collapsed in panic, and turned to run, that is exactly where most soldiers actually died. The victors would just mercilessly run them down from behind. Now, Roman commanders totally understood that a pitched, chaotic battle was always a massive gamble, so they often tried winning before the battle even began. They relied on intense engineering, building heavily fortified camps every single night to secure their position. They'd use grand tactical encirclements and cut off enemy supplies, frequently starving the enemy out rather than rolling the dice in open combat. Section 4. The exception, when the machine broke. Of course, this incredible machine had strict rules, and when those rules were broken, well, things got really ugly. Take the Teutoburg Forest ambush in 9 CE. Summer operations were over, and Commander Varus was leading his men back to winter quarters. He trusted a Germanic allied leader named Arminius, deviated from the safe route, and marched right into impassable, swampy forest terrain. The Romans couldn't form their lines. They couldn't use their empty space. Stripped of their system by the rough terrain and a smart enemy commander, the formation completely collapsed under ambush. 3. That is the number of entire Roman legions lost in that forest. We're talking up to 20,000 men wiped out in a matter of days. It was a devastating blow, proving that this brilliant system absolutely required structure to survive. Section 5, a 500-year legacy. Let's move to and see how this builds into the broader picture of world history.
Because despite absolute disasters like Teutoburg, this system dominated the world for an incredibly long time. Why? Because the Romans didn't rely on being Superman. They relied on permanent infrastructure. While seasonal tribal warriors had to literally disperse and go home for the autumn harvest, the Roman legion was a full-time, paid, professional force. They had heated winter barracks. They trained relentlessly, 12 months a year, every single year. That created a compounding advantage in discipline that a seasonal militia simply could never touch.
500. For over 5 centuries, despite the occasional devastating defeat, this beautifully disciplined, brutal system kept the empire intact. On a macro scale, the Roman war machine remained basically undefeated, totally altering the course of Western military history forever. Which leaves us with a fascinating final thought for this explainer. When you look at the sheer longevity of this machine, what makes a military system truly immortal? Is it the heavy, lethal weapons like the Pilum and the Gladius? Or is it the unbreakable, grinding, structural discipline of the men who wielded them?